schools, though, are not meeting the challenge of combating Jew hatred. And among the groups calling them out on this is the Washington-based Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law, which fights anti-Semitism through law and policy and provides legal guidance for individuals facing anti-Semitic harassment and discrimination. And joining us in studio is Alyza D. Lewin, president of the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law. Alyza, thanks for joining us. So I sketched it out a little, but talk just briefly about the Brandeis Center, what it specifically sees as its mission, especially when it comes to the situation on campuses.
Sure. The Brandeis Center is a nonprofit that's set up to use legal tools to combat anti-Semitism. We have a particular focus on the university campuses, and so we represent students, we advise them, we guide them. We also represent them in cases, in administrative complaints with the Department of Education and in federal lawsuits, as well as educating university administrators on how to recognize the anti-Semitism and their legal obligations to protect students from the harassment and discrimination they're experiencing.
Well, let me ask you then about cooperation with school administrations, because unfortunately we've seen some bad examples. I could cite, for example, Columbia University, most notoriously, in which it's not just students but administrators which seem to be problematic in dealing with, for example, anti-Semitism and also rhetoric, anti-Israel rhetoric that is really becomes incendiary.
That's correct. One of the biggest problems we face is that the university administrators they mischaracterize what's taking place on their campus. It's not a good faith political debate, which is what they pretend that it is. It's actually the vilification and the dehumanizing of Jews and of Israelis, right? It's equating them with evil. And this has been going on for years now on campuses, where there are groups on campus that are determined to equate Israelis and Jews who say, I'm part of a people, the Jewish people, who have an ancestral connection to Israel. That's how I define my Jewish identity. It might not be that I define my Jewish identity according to religious practice, but I define myself as part of a people. My history, my heritage is rooted in this land, and I have every right to fully engage on campus with this full identity. And the universities are very slow. That's why the NYU recognition was significant, because they recognize that for many Jews on their campus, Zionism is an integral part of what it means to them to be Jewish. The University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where we just settled a case that we brought 4 years ago, did the same thing. They're now universities are starting to recognize that what's really happening is the demonization and the shunning and the marginalizing of those Jews who say, this is how I define my identity, it's connected to the land of Israel, and I have every right to express that part of my identity.
Right, as you say, starting to recognize. And we have had students and activists who said, in many cases, the universities have those codes of conduct in place, and they're just not enforcing them. And the Brandeis Center is dealing with I think, a big picture case, correct, in which actually it's the U.S. Department of Education that is sort of failing on the job here.
Yes. We have lawsuits we have administrative complaints against the Department of Education. We have federal lawsuits against universities like Harvard and Berkeley, UC Berkeley. But then we also brought a case recently, as you mentioned, against the Department of Education, because what the Department of Education has been doing is, if there is an administrative complaint that's filed with the Department of Education against the university, and then someone else goes and files a complaint in federal court, in order to clear its docket, the Department of Education has said, well, then we're not going to deal with it. They've opened investigations, they've started looking at it, and then before they have resolved it, they're just dismissing it. And we've said, especially now with the rise in anti-Semitism and the need to hold the universities accountable and make sure that they take the necessary steps, it's totally irresponsible for the Department of Education to be going against its own guidelines and dismissing cases that is starting to investigate before it's finished the job of holding the universities accountable. So that's our lawsuit against the Department of Education, saying you cannot dismiss these cases just because there is also a federal lawsuit going on. Right.
And just briefly, is there one piece of federal action, such as a new law that needs to be passed in this case, in which either the Congress or an administration needs to be involved?
So the truth is, there is a law right now that is sitting and waiting for Chuck Schumer to bring to the floor, to the Senate floor for a vote, which is the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, which would take the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism and take what is the executive order on combating anti-Semitism and codify it into law, which basically says that when the Department of Education goes to investigate a case involving anti-Semitic harassment and discrimination, in order to understand what anti-Semitism is, they utilize the IRA definition. They are currently doing that under the executive order, but in order to make sure that this lasts longer in perpetuity, this piece of law, this legislation would be very helpful, and that's a piece of law that would be helpful for students to have passed.
Absolutely. Alyza Lewin of the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law, thank you for joining us on Jewish World Weekly.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's been great speaking with you.